So just a quick introduction. So StartupX is an innovation company. We basically work with governments, we work with corporations from around Asia to drive innovation together with startups. We are oftentimes the middlemen. So we work with partners across, in Malaysia, we work with Petronas. We work with Temasek, DBS Bank, Singtel, and so on. And oftentimes we're there to power their innovation journey. And the reason why I guess I'm on this panel is because oftentimes when we look at innovation, sustainability is a very big part of it. This year alone, much of the startup programs that we've launched together with our partners. So the first one with Petronas, we look at energy transition. The second one we have is a waste tech accelerator. So we're working with companies like Sembcorp, Elba, and so on, probably some of you in the room. We are also launching a decarbonization program later this year. So a lot of it, as you can tell, a lot of the innovation is very focused on this space.
Amazing, yeah. So getting to net zero, topic of the night. Why don't we frame based on some of the case studies and some of the clients you're working on, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing companies having as they're trying to make that journey?
I think one of the, and this is coming off a very recent conversation I've had with our partners, is I think obviously it's not just one-dimensional in terms of the challenges they face. It takes a lot of hands to clap to actually get to net zero. And so often it's a journey that no one has really taken before. There's no playbook for it, even if there's a company somewhere else that have achieved their net zero goals. A similar company in another country, another region, can't exactly follow the same playbook. So it's often a guessing game. When we look at our partners and their interest to how they can achieve net zero, I think a lot of the partners we work with have a net zero goal. Getting there is a lot murkier. So a couple of things we see. First one is that these net zero pledges are often made at HQ level. And when it trickles down to regional offices, they often come to us and say, hey, we don't know because we need to clear HQ for this. We know that we have to come up with a plan somewhere, somehow, but we're not sure because we're not the decision makers. And second thing, obviously, is when it comes to decision making, there's so much bureaucracy in an organization. So you might have people at the working level that's really keen, but then there's so much clearances to go back up to. That's often a very difficult journey. And I think also someone was telling me, I'm not sure if he's in the room today, and he was talking about how he managed to achieve a net zero portfolio in his previous role in a different country. And he came to Singapore and realized he couldn't do the same because fundamentally it's so different. What works in Berlin might not work in Singapore, for example. So when it comes to really building up that playbook or getting to net zero, there's a lot of uncertainty to figure out. And these are just, I think, a handful of the challenges that we see when we're talking with our partners.
So tell me a little bit more about how partners are working together. You work with governments, you work with companies, you work with startups. How can all of those parties work together to achieve some of these goals?
Yeah, so I think that's the thing that I'll say is collaboration is incredibly difficult. I think in every single one of my panels, I will say we need to strive for collaboration, but that's easier said than done, to be very honest. So you've got the governments, the regulators, and they're there to create good policies. They are there to maybe give incentives to get the industries to move. You've got the startups, and they are really the technology providers, right? They're the ones coming up with maybe interesting solutions. And then you've got the corporations that maybe want to work with these partners. They have the ability to scale up these solutions that the startups have. They have the data, the resources, possibly even the funding to provide to these companies. You've got the consumer that drives behavior. And these consumers have purchasing power to say, hey, big boys, you need to do this, or you need to focus on that. Then you also, I think one of the very big things that we don't think about is where's the talent to support or power this entire thing going to come from? Because Singapore can import a lot of talent, but every single day my startups tell me, Joyce, I can't find good talent. It is a very difficult. And when you look at some of the technology that's coming out, you obviously need very specialized talent to be able to build up things in this space. So When it comes to collaboration, it's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many. And there's so much things across the entire value chain. Just very recently, we had a conversation with a partner, and we're looking at, and this is just a pilot, it's not even fully adopting and building it, right? This is a multi-year pilot where we have multiple entities involved, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have no idea how to even get it off the ground. Every single entity involved is very excited to want to do this. So we've got waste-to-energy plants, we've got robotics companies, we have hydrogen companies, all within that fold, and we've got some of the very big players in the energy and oil and gas sector that's working with us on this, and there's so many questions. Where do we even get the money from to finance all of this? What sort of, policies do we need to make sure we clear? Which regulators do we need to talk to make sure we get this off the ground? Will the startups even still be around 5 years later when they finally get their turn to even do this pilot? So many questions, right? So it's a massive endeavor when it comes to really collaborating and bring about all of these parties together. But no one really has got it, I think, entirely figured out. So I think every single person in this room, right, every single entity, every single regulator, player, and so on, has to take a much bigger step to actually get there.
Going back to the piece you just said about getting talent, I think that's something we're very focused on. Everybody, I feel like everybody is really interested. There's a lot of climate quitters out there. That's something we talk about quite a bit at some of our events. But how do you translate a climate quitter into a job that makes sense for them if they do need to be skilled? What are some of the things that you're doing in that area?
I don't have an answer myself. Talent is something that comes by so often. Every single day, our startups struggle to hire the right people. And I think later, when you hear from the founders themselves, they probably can shed a lot more light on this issue. Our founders themselves, we're also starting to realize that a lot of founders in this space are getting older and older because obviously coming into energy, it requires a fair amount of expertise in this space. It's hard for a fresh grad to come in, jump in and say, hey, I want to disrupt this industry, or I have a world-changing solution for this. So as you can imagine, it's incredibly difficult to enter this industry and even start thinking about how we can build solutions in this space. Likewise for my corporate partners, so many of them come to me and say, hey, we want people that are to work with us, that are focused on innovation, that are willing to work together with our companies and can champion this. And I said, that's good, but where you can't move someone from any department to come and take over this champion role, right? So talent is incredibly hard to come by. I cannot figure out for the life of me how to make this situation better. I think to give Singapore credit, they've done a lot of things to try and get more talent to come in. But every single day, I think it's still a very difficult question to be answered. One of the things is really looking at how we can start it from the ground up. And I think let's say in education, you don't really get a huge amount of exposure, or at least when I was growing up and in school, I don't really hear a huge amount of information about this. But times have changed. Our education systems might not have. So what happens is they don't get a lot of these information from school. They might get a lot of information from social media. They might get a lot of information from being able to attend events that talk about such topics. And it helps to expose them or make them understand more about the space. And it starts from there. And when they are interested in tackling these issues, they work towards that. They find jobs related to that. They learn more about this space. And maybe it really starts from there because we need a massive amount of people to move into this industry. And it's not going to be, a 1 or 2 year challenge that we can tackle. It takes generations to kind of move and get mindsets to think and change and come into this space.
So let's talk a little bit about some case study examples. You mentioned Petronas as one of the clients that or one of the projects you're working on specifically in net zero. Can you share a little bit more about what you're doing there?
Yes, really, really proud of the companies that we have in that cohort. So we have 25 companies that spread out across from energy companies. So we've got waste to energy companies. We have hydrogen companies looking at increasing the yield of green hydrogen. We've got hydrogen storage and transportation companies. We have companies looking at the EV space. So we've got a number of companies that are looking at new chemicals or more sustainable materials. We've got some companies that are in the robotics space that are basically, also I would say very adjacent to what we're doing for energy transition. It's really quite interesting because I think this is also looking at how we can fuel Malaysia's interest to move towards net zero. And so alongside Petronas, we've got a number of corporate partners such as Tenaga Nasional, which is maybe the equivalent of Singapore Power here. We've got DRB Hycom, and they are the proton manufacturers. They have Eon. We have companies like Hyundai, Sembcorp, Vitol, and so on and so forth, who are a part of the list of partners that are collaborating with our startups. And so all of these partners, right, have so much different areas that they're looking at, right? But it's quite interesting because, for example, one of the companies that and these startups are based across APAC. So we've got companies in Malaysia, Singapore, India, Australia, Indonesia, and quite an interesting mix of companies. When we look at some of the possibilities of what they can collaborate with the startups on, or with the corporate partners on, there's a lot of massive potential. There's a lot of red tape. So that's a challenge. But something very interesting, for example, one of the companies that we've been working with for the last 4 years is a company called Megorium. And some of you might be, I see, oh, he's nodding, I love it. I work with, if you know Megorium, two sisters, very, very young. We started working with them when they were still in school. And first they were working with very, very clean recycled plastic. They break it down into polymers and then mix it with asphalt premix and make it into new bitumen for roads. So there are a number of roads in Singapore. If you drive on those roads, it's actually Megorium's new bitumen. So very exciting. We actually got them connected to a number of partners who are providing them plastic feedstock. In 4 years, they've managed to now be able to work with a certain percentage of not clean plastic. And that's a massive, if you don't understand, it's a massive improvement in terms of the technology. Because if you can only work with very, very, very clean plastic, yes, that's just tackling a tiny bit of the problem. So today they're working with, for example, this big Japanese brand for plastic feedstock. They're working with, I think, a number of, maybe even some of you here in the audience are actually working with Megorium. They're also, building some of the roads here in Singapore. We're also trying to get them to work with partners overseas as well. And I think for some of the partners, even coming up with more circular ways to work with Megorium, I provide you my plastic feedstock, you come and build my road. You come and build the road where, the roads where my office is going to be built. So very interesting things like this. Of course, still very early in their journey, but at least we're seeing that there are partners that are interested to really work with them, both from providing the feedstock and also from, getting the roads implemented eventually.
That's amazing. So obviously, I think we have a lot of larger company executives in this room, not probably as many startups, but we could do another poll. And raise your hand if you are part of a startup. Oh, okay, we do have a decent amount. Okay. So then I'll ask 2 questions. I'll start with, for the corporate, the larger corporations in the room, what's your advice for how they can utilize startups, work with governments a little bit, how they could all work together to achieve their net zero goals?
I recalled an example that I got really pissed about. I got in a conversation with this huge company, this huge MNC that has a net zero goal. And this is the chief sustainability officer who said, oh no, we're very interested, but this year we've hit our goals. I was like, what do you mean you hit your goals? We break down our net zero goal into year by year what we want to do. This year, all we want to do, all our goal is, and this conversation happened in sometime in June. And our goal for this year is just to remove all the plastic packaging from our outlets. We hit that already, so we're done for the year. I was like, what the heck? But you've got, you got so much more issues to tackle. And she was like, yeah, but that's for next year. So it's very puzzling when you talk about it like that, and you think, and you break it down to very granular, and you say, this year, this is all I'm going to do, when you know that the problem at hand is so much bigger. This is a very isolated case, so not saying that everyone's like that. Very, very isolated case. It's just one of the conversations that I had that just really had me scratching my mind and wondering why. Why is someone like that a chief sustainability officer? I think when it comes to, for the sustainability folks in the room who are working in a large corporate, and I met many fantastic people that are helping to push the agenda, is that often I realize that it's a very isolated role. And it's sometimes a bit of a challenge, because there you have the mandate from your CEO to say, hey, we need to be more sustainable. We need to get to net zero. But then you are in this tiny sustainability, I guess, department that's very detached from the rest of the teams, from the rest of the value chain. And you're like, how do I get connected to all of these? Because if we need to get to net zero, it's not my job. It is every single department, every single person's job. It's very hard. I've seen where a lot of CSOs are like figureheads, and they find it very hard to drive that internally. I think it's management that needs to understand that and needs to see how to connect all the dots. But often I see a lot of frustration in that space. And what happens is, if you don't have the mandate and you don't have the money to make change, you can't come to me and say, Joyce, I want to work with your startups and I want to innovate together with them to see how we can drive net zero across our entire value chain. I think the other thing is also about open-mindedness. Often I think corporates, they tend to zero in and think, oh, net zero, decarbonization. So I want to look at companies that are looking at decarbonization. But you don't realize that it's more than just decarbonization. There are so much things to look at when it comes to net zero. So often we have startups, we have partners that look at this list of companies that we have and say, no decarbonization. And then they're like, yeah, maybe not a fit for us. But really be very open-minded about what solutions could be helpful and have that conversation, because sometimes the startups comes up with very interesting propositions. Yeah.
And then for the startups, what kind of steps can they take to find the partners that will help them expand and accelerate?
Have a lot of patience. That's the first thing I would say. I think when it comes to really being able to, I would often say that if you can build a solution where you don't need to depend on a corporate partner, that's the best thing, but it's often very hard, especially in Asia's context. But really look for partners, look for connectors that can help you get introduced. Often, and I always tell people this, like if you talk to one person in a large company and they said no, it doesn't mean that the door is closed. It just means that that's not the right person in the company that you should be talking to. There are tons of departments, there are tons of people that could be champions, and that one person that you spoke to is just not it. So knock on as many doors as possible, and try and find, I would say, people that could be connectors for you. We also, knock on many doors. We also try to identify who are the right fit. Sometimes we realize that in order to find the right person to work with our startup, it requires us talking to 4 different business units before someone can give us, oh yeah, this is the team that you should be working with. So it requires a lot of patience and a lot of hustle to do that, to be honest.